Hey everyone, I hope you're all having an amazing day, and of course, welcome back to the SaveUs podcast. If this is your first time checking out an episode, this podcast is brought to you by Planterra, a sustainable fashion brand that makes climate donations every time you make a purchase. Check us out at planterra.store. Also, if you haven't heard our last episode, it was all about the environmental impact of mining cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And funnily enough, the episode was released the day before Elon Musk tweeted about Tesla no longer accepting Bitcoin. It's super informative and even provides some potential solutions which might forecast some of the alternative avenues Tesla will be pursuing. With that said, let's get into today's episode. This is going to be a really cool one, all about something a lot of us have been drinking since we were kids. Milk, but more comprehensively, dairy and its environmentally friendly alternatives. Perhaps at the forefront of this movement is Swedish company Oatly. If you haven't already tried their delicious oat-based products, you may have heard of them because of huge investments from the likes of Oprah, Natalie Portman, Howard Schultz, and even Jay-Z. Oh, and they're also planning an IPO this year, which is expected to value the company at $10 billion. Let's start out by looking at the broader daily alternative sector and then take a deeper dive into Oatly specifically, both where they came from and where they're planning to go from here. I personally love oat milk and almond milk and religiously stick by a Canadian brand called Earth's Own based out of Vancouver. But with wide number of new dairy alternatives popping up from almond to rice to soy, and also a bunch of unique brands in the industry as well, how do we as the consumer know which option best meets some of our key success factors, which are mainly nutrition, sustainability, taste, and price? So plant-based dairy is taking off. It makes up 13% of the milk sales in 2018 and has also grown 9% back in that same year. Whereas dairy milk had actually declined 6% in terms of sales back in 2018. Now, it's no secret that dairy milk has an extremely negative environmental impact, but how does it fare in relation to its plant-based alternatives? A single glass of dairy results in almost 3 times as much greenhouse gas emissions and 9 times more land use than an equivalent glass of plant-based milk. Producing a glass of dairy every day for a year requires 7,000 square feet, which is actually the equivalent of 2 tennis courts. And that's actually more than 10 times as much as the same amount of oat milk. So dairy sucks, that's settled, but what other types of milk are even popular in the market? There's oat, almond, soy, pea, hemp, coconut, rice, hazelnut, and many more. Personally, I think it's pretty cool how many alternatives there are out there, as it really allows the consumer to test out their preference and find their favorite alternative to dairy. Between these alternatives, almond milk is by far the most popular, controlling 64% of the plant-based market, followed by oat milk, which is currently the fastest growing dairy alternative, and then finally soy milk. It's actually unfortunate that almond milk currently holds the throne, because despite producing lower emissions and requiring the least amount of land of all alternatives, it uses by far the most amount of water after dairy. Almost 3.2 gallons of water for just one almond nut, actually. It's also quite stressful for the bees, who are overworked in pollinating all the almond trees. 70% of commercial bees in the US are drafted every spring for this exact purpose. And it's estimated that a third of those bees die because of the pressures from this unsustainable growth. Oat milk is the complete opposite. Despite being slightly less nutritious than almonds, growing oats has a relatively low impact on the environment, and when grown in rotation, oats create crop diversity, reduce soil erosion, and help lower the risk of plant diseases. An added bonus of Oatly specifically is that oats are usually grown in mass-produced industrial operations where farmers spray on the Monsanto glyphosate-based herbicide before they harvest. As you may have heard, glyphosate has been linked to cancer in some pretty public litigation cases, but after Bayer acquired Monsanto in 2018, they claim that it's actually not a carcinogen. Most of us are probably a bit skeptical about that claim, and it's especially concerning that pretty much all conventionally grown oat products we consume contain the chemical. Oats used in Oatly products, on the other hand, are actually certified glyphosate-free, which is just an added bonus on top of the environmental and nutritional benefits already present. Finally, soy milk, which actually uses the least amount of water of the three. Women in particular have avoided soy for a long time, given worries about increasing risk of breast cancer. But recent studies have actually shown that the reverse is true, and soy appears to have some protective value when eaten in moderation. The main environmental drawback of soy milk is that soybeans are grown in massive quantities worldwide to feed livestock for meat and dairy production. And this occurs to an extent that large portions of the Amazon have been burned, mainly for the use of soy farms. Consumers can be proactive and read soy milk carton labels to see which ones have been made from organic soybeans in the US or Canada in order to help. Ultimately, each plant-based alternative has its pros and cons, of course, but it's clear that all are superior to traditional dairy, and so I strongly urge all of you to choose whichever alternative makes most sense for you, as long as you actually commit to transitioning away from dairy, given how problematic it really is. Diving a little deeper into Oatly itself now, the company was founded in the 90s based on Swedish research from Lund University. They actually have patented enzyme tech that copies nature's own process and turns fiber-rich oats into nutritional liquid food perfectly designed for humans, which sounds pretty complicated but also super cool at the same time. Despite steadily growing sales over the last 20 years, growth exploded during the pandemic. If you look at the biggest product growth over the last year, number 1 is hand sanitizer. Sure, that makes sense. Number 2 is toilet paper. Yeah, I'm sure we all remember that kind of conundrum. But number 3 is oat milk. What? It's thought that this arose partly because of the attractive expiration dates relative to normal dairy when people were stocking up food back in prime lockdown months, but also because of an overall increased willingness from consumers to try plant-based products. They were also able to first win customers over in coffee shops like Starbucks before then moving on to the grocery channel. Fast forward to 2021, the company first made official its intentions to go public in February and have recently set its terms for its IPO on NASDAQ. They're aiming for a $10 billion US valuation and share price between $15 and $17. They plan to issue nearly 65 million shares and raise about $1 billion as well. Almost $200 million of this capital will be used to repay sustainability-linked loans to some European banks, while the majority will be dedicated towards its continued long-term growth. The company is most established in Europe and the US, but have recently been making significant efforts across the Asia-Pacific region, where sales have actually quadrupled since last year. So yes, everyone, I know that was a huge information overload, but let's finish off the episode with some key takeaways that you probably already knew anyways. Number 1, dairy milk is not at all okay for the environment. 2, there are a bunch of plant-based alternatives that are blowing up, each with their own unique pros and cons. 3rd, Oatly was a big beneficiary of the pandemic, which we love to see, and they're also gearing up to go public very soon. Finally, if you haven't already, please consider making the switch to plant-based dairy products. I already shouted out my favorite brand from Canada, Earth's Own, which was probably my biggest inspiration behind tackling this episode. We'd also love to hear your favorite plant-based dairy brands, so feel free to hit us up on Instagram at plantera.store to let us know. Feel free to also check out our website, which is also plantera.store, to find some super high quality and sustainable clothing. As always, thank you so much everyone for listening. We had a great time and can't wait for next week's episode. Have a great week, and don't forget to do your part to save the planet and save us.